So welcome to the Innovation Pop-Up and our education session today, which is obviously on procurement. Delighted to welcome Paul Ralston, who is our Director of Commercial and Procurement, and he'll be obviously leading the session today. So the format is quite straightforward. Paul is going to give us a presentation, which is going to last about 30 minutes, 35 minutes or so. And then we'll move into a question and answer session. So I encourage you all to have your questions ready. And if you just ask anything and contribute to the conversation and the discussion. So before I do pass over to Paul, I just want to, first of all, welcome our Innovation Pop-Up members and also our ABHI members who are joining us today. So welcome to this innovation session. But just a few words about the Innovation Pop-Up and what we do here at the Trust. So really it's an effort to try and accommodate that technology that is out there in the market and the advances that are being made, and to try and align those with the unmet needs that we have here in the Trust. So how do we deliver healthcare in the future? Because the way that we're delivering it at the moment is unsustainable and eventually unaffordable. So how do we accelerate that transformation? So the Innovation Pop-Up is a small cog in that process, trying to align technological solutions with unmet needs here, trying to understand what the barriers are for that transformation and trying to overcome them. So we work with internal staff to try and understand what their needs are, but we also work with the market and the commercial space out there and try and introduce unmet needs with technological solutions. So if you want to find out more about the Innovation Pop-Up, please do contact us. There will be details on our flyer. So on that note, I will pass you over to Paul. Paul, welcome, and over to you.
Welcome everybody, welcome to those online, so hopefully you can all hear me okay. So yes, I'm going to try and talk to you around a sort of general overview of sort of NHS procurement and how we can work with sort of commercial partners, particularly around innovation, new technology, and some of the sort of difficulties and obstacles that we know organisations face when they're trying to deal with the NHS. Can't promise that I can change the world for everybody, but you know, we can try and at least identify some of the common barriers. So there will be a boring bit about procurement law because you know I do work in procurement and there is a law, but we'll try and get through that as quickly as we all can and get on to the better stuff. So just want to try and give a bit of an overview of the landscape of NHS procurement. Some of you may be more familiar than others around how the NHS works, so we'll just try and give a bit of an overview of that. We will talk about the procurement law and how some of the regulations that we have to deal with and how we can help support those and some of the common sort of issues that we have. Awareness of some of the key routes into the NHS and you know some of the common challenges, and then try and sort of understand some of the ways we can help and some of the ways that we can give you some insight into how to be successful when working with the NHS. Clearly, we have a broad spectrum of sort of organisations here, so this is quite generic, and you know we will try and answer any questions we have. Please don't ever ask me any technical questions because I probably don't know the answer. But you know, if there are things that we can try and take away and respond to, then we will do that. If you want to put questions in the chat, we'll try and pick up on those as we can. And if you know others are sort of liking those questions, if you just put the thumbs up, then we can try and make sure we answer the most common ones as well. So okay, so we'll make a start. So this is where I hope everything works, and straight away it doesn't. So that's typical, isn't it? So the screen has died already. Just bear with me, everybody. There we go. So what is the NHS procurement landscape? As I say, some of you may be more familiar with working in the NHS or around the NHS than others. But the first thing is the massive contradiction that says NHS stands for National Health Service. Yet we are not one single entity across the NHS. We are made up of hundreds of separate legal entities, which is one of the issues that everybody faces when dealing with the NHS, that it's not a single service, despite the fact it's called the National Health Service. So obviously, the NHS is also free at the point of use, which does mean that the way the money flows and how we have to account for that does have an impact in how we work across the different parts of the NHS structure. Procurement happens at a national, a regional, a sub-regional and a local level, all at the same time, and in different parts can be all of those all at once. So some areas might be working to a national solution, some might be doing a sort of local one, some might be somewhere in the middle doing a regional or collaborative one. However, particularly with what we call NHS provider trusts, so this is acute hospitals like what you find at Leeds Teaching Hospitals, mental health community trusts as well. Generally, they all have individual procurement teams, not exclusively, but vast majority do have their own sort of procurement service. So generally, procurement sits at a more local level rather than at the other levels. And decision makers are clearly nearly always at the local level. So if you're talking to a clinician is based at their local organisation. They may well be a, nationally recognised clinician or, leader, but they are probably working for a single organisation. So that does mean decision making becomes a local thing. That's both good and bad, as we'll sort of come on to shortly. So not being a single organisation is the first hurdle that most sort of new entrants into the NHS have. Anyone trying to innovate in this space, the biggest single difficulty is you're knocking on well over 200 doors potentially. So there are, in England alone, there are 223 NHS trusts. So they are all separately constituted legal organisations. On top of that, you've then got what are known as integrated care boards and integrated care systems. So they sit at a geographical regional area, and there's 42 of those. And then you've also got NHS England. So that is made up of 7 regions. And then you've got Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland that sit on top of that in terms of they have their own structures. So all in, you're looking at well over 300 separate organisations, and depending on what good services that you're trying to innovate on, trying to sell to the organisations, that's quite a lot of fragmentation to be looking at. If you go to, we always got compared to supermarkets in the NHS and the way they do things. It's like that doesn't happen at Tesco's or Morrison's. It's a single central system with spokes out. That's not how the NHS works. In terms of procurement, we use lots of different mechanisms in terms of ordering goods and services and how we access those. So what we call our route to market. So we are governed by public law, so procurement law in the UK. And one of the big things that we can use is frameworks. So within England, this is just for England. This isn't the same for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. But in England, there are the NHS England, who are our regulators, accredited 20 framework hosts. So one of the routes to market for new suppliers, new entrants, innovators is going through a framework organisation to help support them access the NHS market. But there are 20 of those, and there is over 500 individual frameworks that organisations can sit on. Now, clearly, they're market specific in certain areas, and I'll go on to a little bit around which markets we use quite a lot. So, but again, that's still quite fragmented base to be working from. In addition to, the 200 odd NHS trusts, there are also, procurement teams within integrated care boards and integrated care systems, NHS England, and for those who are potentially looking at particularly med tech products and services, NHS supply chain is a key area that we all use, which is a national sort of framework provider who do a lot of work on behalf of all of the NHS. And you've got key stakeholders, decision makers across all of those at the same time, which does complicate the marketplace. So when you start looking at doing your sort of stakeholder mapping, suddenly instead of it looking like a nice Venn diagram, it looks more like one of those spiderweb diagrams and becomes very complicated, and you need a degree to understand. So that's fine. And within all of that, although NHS England are our regulators, and we will do our best in terms of our constitution is to deliver the best patient care, there is no specific way that we define that. There is no set path for anyone to follow. So if you find a successful route in one organisation, doesn't follow necessarily that that's then a defined route that everybody else has to follow. So we are free to make our own choices and our own decisions based on what we feel is right at that local level. So this is, I will keep going on about that sort of local level because it does, it is one of the single most difficult things to get over in terms of how we access sort of innovation and how we work towards making that something that commercially can sit across the NHS. So that's the sort of overview on the framework. So I'll carry on and we'll get into the boring bit now. So this is NHS sort of procurement regulation. So I don't want this to be, everything we do is governed by the law, although it is. What this is about is trying to allow people to understand the framework we have to work in. So, this is a law like any other law. If you break the speed law on your way here or on your way home, unless you're on your bike, then you might be lucky to do that. But if you do that, there are consequences of doing that. Ultimately up to jail time. So for individuals, procurement law is no different. Generally, it comes with a reputational issue and a fine rather than any particular one person going to jail. But that's not. That doesn't mean that it's any less of a law just because of that. So, however, what it is designed for, it is designed to ensure that there is fair and open competition in the marketplace. My job is to make sure that we give a fair opportunity to anybody in the marketplace. It's not my job to limit that opportunity. That's what the procurement law is there to try and do. Is it simple? No, but that's the point of it. The overarching theme is there to try and make sure that what we do is fair and open to the marketplace. It recently changed, so some of you will be aware that we used to work under what was called the PCR 15, the Publics and Contracts Regulations 2015, which were a set of laws which were governed actually across the whole of the European Union. Brexit then happened in 2016, and so we've been working for a number of years on laws that the UK government decided it wanted to change to be more UK specific rather than based around what the European law was. It's not massively changed, don't get me wrong, it's not sort of night and day difference, but it did change in February 2025. So that does mean procurement teams as well as industry and suppliers are now having to navigate what is a new way of working. And I'll be honest, we don't all have the answers yet because it's only sort of 3 months old, and there's a lot more work to do around how that is going to develop over the next sort of 2-3 years as systems start to work with it, and then case law emerges in things that, what was the law designed to prevent and what things was it trying to allow. The Procurement Act, so it's known as the Procurement Act 2023, which is a bit of a misnomer in that it only came into effect in 2025, but that's just the way the law works. It's the date it actually goes through Parliament when it starts going through. That's normally the year they use. So this started in 2023. It is designed to simplify processes for suppliers. I've done all the training. I'm what's called a super user at sort of cabinet office level, and that was the intent to try and do it. It's a lot less process heavy than it was. That's not to say there aren't processes, but the aim was to try and make sure it was easier for people to work within the framework of, and particularly for sort of new entrants to the market, SME organisations, voluntary sector as well, that they could participate in some of these schemes where they've maybe been put off in the past. So there's actually 3 different bits of the law, actually. So there's still the Public Contracts Regulations 2015, because if you procured something before February 2025, the law is the law as it was then, not the law as it is now. So there is a differential. So, we do find particularly marketplace does sometimes get a bit confused around, well, I thought the law had changed and therefore I'm now allowed to do this. That's not quite how it works. It's based around the law at the point in time when your contracts or whatever it is came into existence or the procurement started. So that's still a thing, and we still have to work with that. Procurement Act 2023, as I say, it's designed to be more simplified. So it's open and competitive, 2 procedures effectively. Open is effectively what it says. You put an advert out and then anyone can bid against that and then you evaluate it. Competitive flexible is slightly different, and I'll come on to that in a slide in a minute. I won't spend loads of time on it, but just to sort of give people a view of what that could look like. Everybody who is going to interact with that has to go onto what's known as the central digital platform. So if you are a potential supplier to the NHS, whether you think you're going to be one now or whether you're hoping to be one in the future, I would recommend that you get yourself registered on there. It doesn't take long to do. It's run by the Cabinet Office, it's free of charge, and it is what drives effectively everything moving forward. From there, you would then get access to what's known find a tender service. So any opportunity that then comes out would come up on the find a tender service. And also there are new requirements in terms of what us as legal entities have to do around how we advertise our future contract requirements. So there is what's called a pipeline notice we have to publish every year, which identifies any contracts over £2 million. We should publish that we are going to procure that in the next 18 months so that people can start to see, marketplace suppliers can start to see what that future looks like and be working towards that. So it is useful tool just to register on. Obviously, over the past few years, sustainability and social value have become a bigger focus. There is 10% mandatory weighting on evaluation criteria now for contracts. If you're an organisation who's bidding for contracts over £3 million, you have to have carbon reduction plans and you have to provide those annually. So there is more of a requirement around social value and sustainability. And when we talk about social value within the context of Leeds, we are a big anchor institution within Leeds. If you might already deal with us in some way, shape or form, but if I'm looking to give you 200 grand's worth of business for something, what benefit with that sort of system and that money are you going to be able to provide to the communities within Leeds, whether that's patient care or something else? How do we promote something that is local, which is a local benefit for the population of Leeds? It's not always easy, but it is something that we can help provide, particularly in Leeds through the innovation pop-up, but also just within procurement. We have the Leeds Hospital Charity. So if you were at a stage where you was looking to bid for business and you was a bit like, well, how can I do social value? There are ways and means that we can help support and signpost towards things that you could do potentially in the community area. Lots of other trusts do similar things as well. And if you're ever unsure on those type of things, I would suggest just reach out to those organisations. They will try and help you. Clearly, one of the things is enhanced transparency. This is both for the marketplace and for public organisations as well. So one of the key things around the new Procurement Act is around particularly how we monitor performance. So if I'm having a very, very poor sort of service from a supplier, we have to publish the top 3 KPIs of that supplier annually, which then allows other organisations to review that and see, is this an organisation that's worth dealing with? Obviously, if you're new to the NHS, then that's going to be something that we'll be working on in terms of those maybe KPIs are going to be a little bit more sort of prosaic if, it could be more around trials, etc. So there would always be a bit of push and pull on those, but it is there designed to help support, are we getting value for money overall? And unique to, not quite unique to the NHS, but, unique to healthcare provision, there is still what's called the provider selection regime, which is another set of law. So we effectively have to work to 3 different laws all at the same time. And that law is around specifically where it's healthcare service contracts. So we as an organisation are actually commissioned, so we are contracted to provide services to the Integrated Care Board, and they would do that under the provider selection regime. So an example of that would be if I was looking for an oncology service, I wouldn't do that under the Procurement Act. I would be doing it under the provider selection regime because it's specific healthcare services that I am looking for, and therefore different rules apply. It gets very complicated under the provider selection regime, so I wasn't intending to go through those, but if anybody has any specific things, we can try and answer any questions. And here's a sort of brief overview. I'm assuming we're sharing the slides after this, so people can take these away. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but effectively, the very top line from left to right sort of shows if you do an open procurement, you send a notification out, you advertise your requirements, you stick your documents out there, bidders then sort of bid against that, and then we evaluate it and award a contract at the end. Anything else is basically open to how we want to structure a procurement. So you can do a simple sort of, well, we might do a two-stage where we actually say there's certain things we want to know about you first, and then we'll get into sort of evaluation of product or service in particular. We can do it with negotiation. We can do it with sort of innovation in there. So we are flexible now in how we can do that. Under the old rules, this was more difficult for us to achieve, particularly that bottom one. The innovation one was quite difficult to do and quite specific, and was almost anti-innovation in the way that you had to do it. But so I think we are trying to learn from that, and we are trying to understand it. So but yeah, again, just a bit of an overview just in terms of the things that we can do. So just want to go through, and this isn't unique to bidding. I did put successful bidding on there, but actually this is wider than that. This is just more generic good information to have. So obviously we are a public sector organisation. Your taxes, my taxes, all go to fund us on a day-to-day basis, and I always cry when I see how much tax I pay every month. So I want to make sure it's been spent wisely, as I'm sure everybody else does as well. So everything that we do is about trying to ensure that we provide value for money for the patients that we serve, for the communities of Leeds, and nationally across the whole of the NHS. So that's a key driver for us. It's also one of the reasons why the law exists, so that we have to go to public account. I have an internal audit committee that I have to go to, a finance and performance committee. All of those committees are there to ensure that the organisation is delivering the best value it can for the money that it gets from the government. Understanding NHS standards is absolutely crucial. It's hard to get away from. There are, depending on the market that you are in, there are some very stringent standards. So things like Medical Health Regulation Authority, or if you're in estates and facilities, there may well be health and safety, environmental standards that you need to work to. So understanding those as you are developing as an organisation, if you are developing a product or service that is going to fit a market need, please try and understand the standards. I'll come on to some of the regulation bits in a minute, but just having that overview of what's the almost minimum line is very useful to know. Social value, modern slavery and sustainability are more and more important as you for organisations, as you for innovators. So both as innovators, how are you delivering more in this space is one of the keys that we are looking for, and also in terms of as we continue on this road, on our road to net zero, which the NHS has taken the lead on in terms of trying to get there sort of 5 years before the government's promise, and locally around social value and sort of modern slavery is a continuing area. We see on the news every now and again, organisations who fall foul of modern slavery rules because they're buying products from wherever, and potentially those are not done in a suitable way. So if you're providing a new entrant, you're a new entrant to the market, what's your supply chain look like yourself? Potentially might be an issue to consider. And having evidence of something really does enhance, it's a bit like a job interview, that bit, if you've got some evidence that shows you've done it before or you're capable of doing it before, that really does add credibility to you as an organisation. So moving on now, so we've got the boring bit out of the way. So moving on to channels of access, depending on sort of what it is that you're potentially looking to sort of introduce to the NHS and what market area you're in. So there are a number of routes that we use on an everyday basis. So this is both me as sort of Leeds Teaching Hospital, but more widely anyone, particularly in England, but also the other sort of 3 home nations as well. So NHS Supply Chain is a national sort of organisation that's an arm's length body of NHS England, totally owned by them, and they are there to provide goods mainly, medical devices certainly, but also capital items. There are some non-medical things, so particularly sort of uniforms, food, and a little bit of stationary type stuff, IT, but not a lot, not massive in that space, along with big capital equipment. So things like MRI scanners, etc., are all what NHS Supply Chain sort of provide. provided at scale, done nationally, and we can all access that. So it's a key market, depending on which market you're in, that's a key area of focus for sort of new entrants into the marketplace, because it's more likely that we would want to be procuring via that route than doing something locally in a number of cases. Atomis is linked to the sort of central digital platform. That's what the NHS family, so everyone in the NHS should be using that system in terms of advertising its requirements. That's from the Department of Health, NHS England, NHS Scotland, NHS Wales, and then local organisations as well. So I probably should have put that in the other one, but yeah. So it's the central digital solution that we use to advertise our requirements, but it's also what we use to support contract management. So it's a useful tool to be looking at. You can see what opportunities are coming out. There are a number of framework agreements, and I'll come on to those again in a second, just in terms of some of the key ones that we use both in Leeds and probably across the north, actually, but certainly across West Yorkshire as well. Collaboration. Some of you may have seen recently, sort of since Jim Mackey's taken over at NHS England, some of the talk is now about how we work more collaboratively at a system level. Clearly, procurement is one of those. This is both in terms of how do we procure at scale, so are there economies of scale if we procure more? That's actually sometimes more difficult if you're a new entrant, because you might not be able to support working across multiple organisations. So, how do we manage that with people who may well be looking for smaller scale? But it's more of a focus, and it will continue to be more of a focus. It's also around systems and processes on the back end. So this isn't just about how do we buy at scale. This is also about how do we standardise some of our approaches, which I think is beneficial to sort of organisations looking to join the NHS, because actually it should make it easier that once you know one way in back to the 200 plus front doors, they're not all different front doors anymore. There's less front doors to be knocking on. And obviously there will always be local procurement contracts in place depending on what the market is. Obviously generally means lower scale, one-off stuff, but it's not unique to that. It does depend. Local organisations are still accountable organisations in and of themselves, so are very capable of making their own decisions. So just some things to remember. So based on where we've got up to today, I would say, register on Atomis, there's a link in there. Find a tender service, which is part of the central digital platform. And then I've called it, it's actually called Supply Chain Coordination Limited is the formal name of NHS Supply Chain. But there's links in there to all of those sort of registration portals. So you can get yourself registered on there just in case anyone was finding difficulty with that. Sort of hopefully this bit is a bit more around the what should you be doing and how can we help and support through the likes of our innovation pop-up, but also more broadly as well. So I think it always goes against the grain a little bit, because I'm a procurement person first and foremost, so I'd want everyone to sit in a darkened room until we've ordered something and no one ever speak to anybody, because that's the safest way to do it. But it's not the reality of where we are. So I strongly advocate that, any new supplier, any new entrant, anything, you might be an existing supplier, but you might have a new technology, is building relationships across the NHS, but include procurement. We will be honest with you. Not everyone is the same. Procurement teams are not in the same place across the whole of England in particular, but across the whole of the UK. However, if you've got those relationships, you can start to understand what barriers might be coming across, and you'll learn which teams are probably more supportive and which teams are more difficult to work with. So, have networks. We don't, we are, myself and Minnie just talked about, we are generally quite free at giving out our advice and our support. We don't charge for it, or we don't charge a lot. So, make use of it where you can. It's important to do that. The right people who are the decision makers are the people who use these sort of products and technologies every day. So why not sort of liaise with them? Yes, there are rules around it. Yes, we need to be careful. I tend to, the ones that worry me are the ones where someone goes right down the line and then says, right, I want to spend £1 million. And it's like, that's not how we can do things. But having that opportunity to understand what the NHS is looking for is invaluable, and I would sort of recommend that that you do that. Long-term growth is possible, so it's not, despite everything that I've said, you can have sustainable growth. You can build out from success to success to success, but it's not a case of it's going to be overnight. Is the honest answer. It takes hard work. So I don't want to kid anybody that just because you're successful in one organisation means that suddenly everyone is going to use your technology or your solution. That's probably not going to happen. It's probably going to be a lot of continuous hard work. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't sort of support and try. And sorry, because I'm just going to stop sharing because there are some other slides which someone hasn't put on my hard drive for me, so just bear with me. And then we'll come back to that. I was prepared, honest everybody. So, this is where you find you've got loads and loads of files and you can't find the one that you're looking for quickly. I'll come back to those questions in a minute if that's okay. Yeah. Get this back up. Okay. Is this going to change on everybody's screen? Here we go. All right. Yeah. So that's that bit. So regulations. So just wanted to go through some of the regulations that are relevant depending on the market area that you're in. So Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency is one of the big ones, as it's clearly based around medicines, although actually lots of medical devices can be classed as a medicine as well. So this is where places like the Innovation Pop-Up can help and support because they can navigate some of those challenges and some of the sort of nuances around what that is. There's also what's known as the Medical Device Online Registry, which is a new thing that's coming in. So for any implantable devices, one of the things that we'll be looking at is making sure we can track those. Some of you will be sort of familiar with the sort of breast implant scandal and the fact that we didn't know across the NHS who had what breast implants yet. When the horse meat scandal happened, most supermarkets knew within hours whether they had any contaminated meat within their supply chain. So things like the Medical Device Online Registry are clearly sort of big areas and increasingly important. And what I would say linked to that is use of GS1 standards. So GS1 is global standards, so barcodes effectively. So these have things like global trade identification numbers and global location numbers. So these are unique identifiers that build up sort of products. NICE, so the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, is a very widely used sort of set of guidelines. So if someone says we work to NICE approved guidelines, then those would probably be something that you need to be aware of depending on the market that you're in again. GDPR, obviously as we move into a more digital and cloud-based world, the sort of GDPR requirements are more and more sort of to the fore, particularly around where information is hosted and, in the world of things like ChatGPT and large language models, where does that information, how far and wide is that information spread? UKCA, so this is the conformity mark, so it used to be the kite mark and the CE mark in sort of European sort of parlance. CE still exists, but it is slowly being replaced by the UKCA mark, and particularly around sort of AI models is the good machine learning practice. So, just things to be aware of is what I would say. It's not exclusive, there are others, but I'm just trying to pick out the main ones for people to be aware of because clearly we would work to those quite a lot. So just going back to the sort of procurement channels, I just wanted to try and give a bit of a flavour for people, depending on the market you're in, who we might use and why we might use them. So I've tried to identify the sort of 5 biggest frameworks that we in Leeds Teach Children hospitals use, but also probably certainly across West Yorkshire that we would use, and likely across the north of England as well. Those 5 are the sort of big 5 that we use. So Crown Commercial Services is a national one set up by the Cabinet Office. It's basically a central government organisation. NHS SBS is a sort of large organisation. They do lots of things. They actually do payroll services and financial services, but one of their arms is a framework host and a framework provider. And then the other 3 are effectively framework providers. Interestingly, the one that's north of England, Commercial Procurement Collaborative, is actually run from a Leeds-based NHS trust, so is one that we try and use quite a lot, particularly in West Yorkshire. So which is the best one to use, depending on which market segment you're in? So Crown Commercial Services is very strong for us. We would certainly be looking at IT software and services via Crown Commercial Services, or doing something sort of local or collaboratively. They are very good. You've got things like the G Cloud option and lots of other frameworks as well. They also use what's known as the Spark DPS, so that's a particular innovation sort of framework, so that allows organisations to sort of access that on a fairly regular basis. G Cloud comes up about every 2 years for renewal. So, you know, it's fairly iterative in that you're not locked out for long if you're not currently on it. The hardware side of IT, we might use Crown Commercial Services, but there's also a decent offering from North of England CPC, so it might be an area. I would say it's probably generic IT hardware, so if you're thinking of, you know, your technology solution is something in that space, but is more clinically based, that's probably not quite what we're talking about. Anything estatesy is likely to be via one of those framework providers, so North of England CPC, SBS or LPP, which is a similar version to NOE CPC, it's just based down in London effectively. Medical products, medical devices would certainly, our first protocol would be NHS supply chain, or we would likely across West Yorkshire be looking at a collaborative arrangement as a first and foremost. And the reason for that is to try and standardise care across West Yorkshire. So, you know, what we don't want is inequality, and, you know, just having different solutions in different places may lead to that. So, we understand that's not always easy if you're a brand new entrant to the NHS. You know, being at that type of scale is probably difficult. So we understand that. So it's not an absolute, but it is something that we would be sort of looking to do. And then big capital items. So, you know, whether that's IT solutions, you know, big medical devices or big buildings infrastructure type stuff, probably a combination of any one of those. It's probably more difficult for us to sort of say which one we would be going down, but it could be any of those locally as well. So hopefully that just gives a bit of a flavour, depending on the market segment you're thinking about, which are some of those solutions that we would use to sort of identify. So back to sort of you know, how can we help? Or what's good advice from my perspective as the sort of procurement and commercial lead for this organisation. So I've already said about networking, already said about, you know, engage with us as a community within procurement, but also wider communities in terms of whatever areas and segments you're looking at. What are you offering that's different to somebody else? You know, I will be honest, I have probably had 1,000 sales pitches in the past year around, you know, someone who can offer me something different. But what actually, you know, where's the evidence for that? How does that say anybody can sell anything? But, you know, what is it about what you're offering? Ultimately, you know, we are talking about, for us, it's about how does it affect patient care? So those are the things that are going to grab our attention. Just having a slightly shinier, whizzier thing isn't necessarily something that we would be all too focused on. So yeah, so how do we improve that sort of patient care? That's the critical one. Now I would say, what's the current market like? What market are you looking to get into? What analysis have you done yourselves? You know, you can come to us and we can help, but you know, if this is already a saturated market that's almost commodity based, how do you think you're going to get a foothold in that market compared to something that is extremely niche and doesn't really exist yet? So depending on what it is you're offering, what analysis have you done to help sort of understand us as a marketplace? And I would suggest sort of particularly things like Porter's Five Forces and Pestle are good places to start on there. Linked to probably some stakeholder mapping in terms of those networks that you've built up would be sort of key areas to have a look at. As I've mentioned, NHS is very fragmented. So just because it works in one organisation, that doesn't automatically translate. I would love to sort of say it does, but it just doesn't. Biggest thing for us, safety and risk are the key drivers across the NHS. So ultimately, that does take time to consider. We're not in a position where if you introduce a new piece of technology and it fails, then all that happens is a door don't shut properly. You introduce a new piece of technology or solution here and it fails and somebody dies potentially. So we are going to take that very, very seriously. That does slow things down because we have to be absolutely sure that what we do does not introduce patient harm, does not introduce long-term patient harm or immediate patient harm. Obviously, if we do something and suddenly someone is, put, in discomfort for the rest of their life and they're 23 and are going to live till they're 80, that is a very, very serious thing for us to consider and not something that we are going to undertake. So everything that we do is based around trying to ensure that we are as safe as possible and as risk averse as possible. That's not to say we don't innovate and we don't sort of accept that there are risks with things. There are risks with things every day, but it is the framework that we do work to. And that's why regulation, evidence, and sort of, sometimes just the amount of time it takes to get through things. If you're introducing something new and we do a clinical trial, that could be 6 months. We might only have 3 patients a year. And that could take a long time to get enough of an evidence base to say this was the right thing to do. And I think the last thing is we've got thousands of experts in the NHS. So I can talk to 2 clinicians who'll give me 2 completely different answers, even though they work in the same room. So experts are not always aligned. Just because you might have an expert in Oxford who said this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life and will revolutionise patient care, there's probably someone in Exeter who says something completely different. And unfortunately, they're both experts and stakeholders in their organisations and are listened to in their organisations. So even if you have an evidence base and you have sort of clinical operational buy-in, doesn't necessarily again translate to that suddenly means that you're going to have everybody on board. So it's just a fact of life of dealing with the hundreds of thousands of employees across separate NHS organisations. So what's sort of driving my world in terms of the future? So what am I excited about? What am I looking for in sort of new entrants to the marketplace and existing suppliers as well? So I think digital is obviously going to be a key thing. So digital transformation will continue. It's already here. It's already doing stuff, and it will continue to drive innovation and change, and has to. We do have to do things differently. We are, massively under the cosh in terms of financial pressures across the NHS. We always will be to some degree, but the not only is the financial pressure the same, but actually society is moving more that way, so we have to keep up with society. People are going to expect in the future that actually I don't need to come into hospital for something. I should be able to do it on my phone on an app, because that's how I live the rest of my life. We're not quite there yet, but it is coming as people get used to this. Sustainability is going to be more of a factor over the next few years as well. Some of you may be aware that there are things going to be changes in 2027 to how we look at sort of carbon reduction plans and what's called Scope 3 emissions. So these are emissions that the NHS's supply chain actually informs, so we can't directly control. So what we can control is, can we turn the heating down and can we put solar panels on the roof, etc. What we can't control is how much carbon comes from our supply chain. So does our supply chain use electric vehicles and does it use sustainable plastics, etc. So those things from 2027 are going to be more and more important and will start to drive our behaviour. They already are. We are pretty good. We're getting a sort of a number of sort of schemes where we're looking at a circular economy. rather than a linear economy. So anything you're doing in that space is something that we are interested in. And you may have seen on the news that there is going to be a 10-year plan. It's got 3 things in it, one of them being digital first, and one of the other ones is prevention, not treatment. So the best way to stop people getting ill is to prevent what it is that they may become ill with before it happens. So those are, those types of innovations that support prevention rather than just pure treatment are going to be increasingly important. It'll be interesting to see when the NHS 10-year plan comes out, how some of that is going to enact, but we clearly need the supply base to help us support some of that as well. So, and I think that was everything from me. So I shall stop sharing my screen. I know there were a few questions, so I don't know why it hasn't stopped sharing on that yet. So,
Yeah, no, me neither.
Yeah. So just bear with me. So I have a few questions. So the first one I've got there is value-based procurement sit within your remit of demonstrating value for money. So yes, so value-based procurement is just procurement with slightly different evaluation criteria. That's not to belittle value-based procurement. It is very, very important, but ultimately it's about undertaking procurement which demonstrates an outcome based on some criteria that we can define. So generally in the NHS, we will look at price and quality as two sort of areas of focus. Obviously, I've mentioned things like social value have a weighting that would apply to the sort of quality side, or some people call it a separate thing. So when we talk about value-based procurement, effectively, we're talking about the same thing. We just might measure what we evaluate in a slightly different way. So we would be looking more at, how can we define a patient outcome? So is there a benefit that we can derive from, either productivity increases? So instead of this being an inpatient stay, it's a pill you can take and go home the same day. Do we release bed space? Do we save nursing time? Does the patient recover quicker? Does the patient have better long-term outcomes, short-term outcomes in some cases? So I think it's more a changing of the criteria we use. So I don't think it's definitely not against demonstrating value for money. Clearly, finances are always going to be important in the NHS. You all see on the news that there's no more money available. The NHS is in crisis. It's spending too much. It needs to be more productive. It's sort of been like that ever since I've been in the NHS, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. But the reality is some of that does exist. So we do need to move to a more outcome-based sort of requirement. We're supporting some work actually around some national guidelines on value-based procurement. So we're just going to undertake some procurements and sort of do some shadow testing to see if it makes a major difference in terms of both the outcome and how difficult it is for suppliers to sort of work in collecting some of that evidence. So I don't think they're misaligned, but I think it's a bit of an unknown field in terms of how is it going to develop over the next sort of few years. So then got any key areas that innovators fail to do or understand when engaging with procurement teams. That's a good question. I don't think there's anything failed to do. I think maybe an understanding of the NHS marketplace and how fragmented it is. We tend to find lots of organisations struggle with the fact that the working or if I pick an example, they've been to Bradford and had really good engagement at Bradford, and yet no one at Leeds is talking to them. So I think a lot of it is around that fragmentation of what we are as an NHS and how you can overcome that. And I think probably lots of organisations underestimate how long everything takes in the NHS as well. As someone who sort of came from the private sector many years ago, I still struggle with how long things take in the NHS. I wish it was quicker, but it's not. But some of that, as I say, is absolutely valid because it's about that risk and safety approach. But I don't think there's anything I've ever seen where, generally innovators are bloody intelligent people. They know their stuff. Lots of times they know the marketplace. They certainly know what it is that they're offering as a solution. So they've done all the right stuff. I think it's maybe that expectation of what happens in the NHS.
Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
And if there's any questions in the room, please do, raise your hands. So we in the Innovation pop-up often work with quite small organisations, SMEs, but on the smaller scale of stuff. And the frameworks that you're talking about seem like how to scale that innovation. So what sort of advice from a procurement perspective and maybe a smaller start do you have for those sorts of organisations?
Yeah, well, I think obviously we can support in a variety of ways. So we can help support around, particularly if you've got something brand new, and let's say you're an individual or a good person, you've developed a bit of code potentially, you know, so you then want to sort of, how do you access the NHS market? So I think those are areas where we can set up some boundaries that say, you know, we're prepared to go so far with this, you know, we're prepared to look at how we help support you trial that product, how we give you access to the right clinicians, and how we sort of look at options around what's the rationale to make this work in our organisation. What we can also do at that point is identify where we may start to encounter challenges around how we expand and what the limit of our ability is before we get to a stage of this may now become a problem because either we're going to break the law or there are other things that we need to sort of get to. Sorry for those online, the computer just said it was going to run out of battery any moment, so may have dropped off. So those in the room could certainly see the panic on the face. So I think we can do that. Obviously, we are an anchor institution, so you know if we can offer any support that you know, even if it's connecting people at this stage, it's even too early to come to us with, so we can help support and sort of look at those types of things. That's clearly part of what the innovation team do as well. We can help funding to some degree. We're not a cash rich organisation, and we never will be. You know, but what we can do is agree sort of, you know, well, actually, yeah, we're prepared to look at this and we're prepared to sort of invest, you know, X amount, which not going to be millions of pounds. Don't get me wrong, we're not sort of Dragon's Den type things. But if there is a benefit that we can see, and you know, we can articulate that in terms of we can look at, you know, let's say there was well, I want to develop this. It's going to cost me 15,000 to develop that. Even if nothing comes as a result of that, there are ways and means that we can help support some of that, as long as, you know, we're working with organisations in the right way. Some of that might be, well, actually, we want something. If this is successful, we will look at sort of opportunities further down the line. And I think we can also just give some of that advice and say we can do some of the blocking. So, you know, you can use procurement to say, well, you know, who do I need to get? Who's the right people to get in front of? And now half the time, that's part of the battle is, you know, we've got 21,000 employees in Leeds. Finding the right 2 or 3 that you need to connect with that are going to make a difference is part of the challenge, and we can help and support that. You know, we do have some flexibility, so you know, the law doesn't really kick in until we get to about 120 grand worth of value. So you know, if this is something that we can deliver under that gives us a lot more flexibility to be able to say, well, actually, yes, we can look at this. We will still want, you know, where's the benefit? That's still going to be the key thing for us. If we're going to spend money, we need to see what the benefit is. It's only if you start talking of, you know, again, don't know which markets you're in, but let's say that, you know, you've got an idea for something, but it's a subscription model. It's £10 a month per person, and you need 15,000 people using it. The money soon racks up. That becomes a lot more difficult proposition for us to sort of say, well, we can help you as sort of a small single organisation or small SME. So, but we can also connect in with other parts of Leeds, so the university, etc., local authority as well. So, you know, is the grants available? Is the funding through other routes that we can't access, etc. So we can help and support that.
Can I ask a question sort of on that route? When it comes to kind of support with funding for small organisations that are trying to get innovative technologies into hospitals, are you able to provide kind of expressions of interest or letters of intent that can help unlock private funding elsewhere that then can accelerate development?
Yeah, potentially, and we've done that for some things where we've said, you know, we'll work with you for the next 6 months, and we'll guarantee a trial, and we'll guarantee to support. So yes, we can. It becomes very specific to what it is we're trying to do at that point. So we don't have like a generic thing that we can say, oh yeah, we just do that and it's all fine. It would be unique to what we're trying to achieve together on there, and access to funding you're trying to look for and how that's going to work and what assurances they're looking for. Again, sometimes the big difficulty with that is funders will look and say, well, that's great, you've got leads, but that's one of 200 organisations. What about the rest of them? So, but yes, we can certainly do those types of things as well. Yeah.
Okay, can I ask for a proportion, if I may?
Yeah.
I mean, for medical equipments, well, for example, for medical equipments, how much percent is gonna for the procurement, say, or for the supply chain in the trust, and how much percent for the direct sale or like a local contract?
Generally, so there is a national sort of requirement for us to transact up to 80% of our particularly medical equipment via NHS supply chain. So that's what NHS England, they don't force us to do that, but they recommend that's what we do. As Leeds, it's about 35% of all of our medical stuff is procured through, probably a little bit higher now, actually, because we haven't done it for the last 12 months. It's not, well, a bit later in the year we do that. So where, you know, but if we're under 50% is done that way. Now, the difficulty sometimes is you do have capital equipment in there, which we sometimes do in a completely different way. So that does skew it a little bit, and it will be market specific. So there are certain things. So if I take something like, we affectionately call it plastic tap, that's not that we don't belittle it, but it's that everyday use, you know, where it's used across the whole organisation, you know, whatever, it could be a cannula or a giving set or something like that. We're probably 90+% through NHS supply chain, whereas other markets it might even be, you know, well, nothing clearly or a lot lower margin. So that, it's a bit of a guide, but yeah, it is sort of dependent on the area.
So it's like for medtech innovation came out from the innovation pop-up, but once into the procurement process, it's more like variety routine. I mean, like it's not like a specific one there. Fixed routine there for the medtech innovation. It just depends on what market it is.
Yeah, it would depend on.
Go to the framework or probably just like, you know, a direct base.
Well, to be fair, what we'd look to do if there was specific things is we'd be looking to work in parallel. So we might say, well, actually, we're happy to contract with you locally as leads, but what we're trying to do is also get you access to a framework, because that benefits me longer term and benefits the supplier longer term as well. So it's not a one or the other situation. What we'll try and do is say, here's what we can do locally, but here's what we think is best in the longer term as well. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Quite a few questions in the Q&A.
Is there? Sorry.
As well as some in the chat.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the Q&A. So we've got. So we've got innovation around digital AI genomics within the NHS. Do you see a risk that ignoring iterative innovation of current products will have unintended consequences to patients? Yes, potentially. I mean, AI is the great frontier at the minute, isn't it? So in particular, you know, it's going to change all of our worlds, and I can't wait for the day when I can sit at home in the boxer shorts and not have to do anything because AI is doing it all for me. So can't wait for that. But I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I think everything is generally iterative, rather than, you know, there are the odd revolution, and you know, that does happen, and that is generally a massive disruption to us all. But most things are iterative. So I would say digital is good. Anything with the word digital and AI is just hot topic at the minute. But I think we've learned from sort of previous iterations of, you know, Internet of Things and you know, blockchain and whatever else it was before that. These things, you know, they change over time, and it generally just becomes a bit of an iteration of what's happening now. So I don't see that. I don't see necessarily that there's going to be some unintended consequences, because I think we are more risk averse and more sort of safety first anyway. So we would likely not be taking those big leaps without some sort of understanding of what that might do to us in the future. But what I can't plan for is a massive disruption of some technology that comes along that I'm just not aware of today that is going to make a massive difference to all of us. Where can I find a list of the 500 frameworks you mentioned and how they align to the framework providers? So there is, if you go to NHS England's website and you just put in framework accreditation, or if you just write in Google framework accreditation NHS, on NHS England's website, it shows you the accredited hosts on there, and I think it at least links out to the individual framework providers. I can't remember whether it shows a list of all 500 off the top of my head, but certainly the accredited hosts are all on there. And next one is, so where are North of England Commercial Procurement Collaborative and Wyatt positioned in your collaborative decision making on introduction technologies or procuring new products and services? So we work quite closely with North of England Commercial Procurement Collaborative. As I said, they're actually owned by Leeds and York Partnership, which is a Leeds-based trust. We tend to work with them on more established routes, so we wouldn't necessarily be positioning that as that's the forefront of what we would be offering as a route to market. We think that's probably when you're a bit more mature, we may be looking at that. And again, it's quite market specific, so the 20 framework hosts can't compete with each other. So if somebody already has a solution and an offering via a framework, the others can't compete with that. So that does mean that they sort of specialise in certain areas. So which is why we would say, particularly estates and facilities and some of the IT areas. In terms of Wyatt, so Wyatt, for those of you who don't know, is the West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts. And it's a collaborative that we've held for a number of years with 6 acute trusts in West Yorkshire, although it's slightly a misnomer because Harrogate is formerly in Humber and North Yorkshire as an ICS, but they do work with us, mainly because patients come our way from Harrogate to Leeds rather than from Harrogate to York. And they've been in our sort of working together club for a number of years. So we do try and share best practice at the minute, but we are currently going through a process of looking how procurement is going to be structured over the next few weeks. And that may change how we're currently doing things. What I would say at the minute is Leeds probably take the bulk of the lead on this type of work, and then we just work with other trusts as needed. That may change over time, but I don't see that happening anytime soon, just because that's a bit of a cultural and structural change that we need to make, and we're not in that place yet. So I hope that helps. How can you get new products listed mid-framework, or is it a case of waiting it out? Depends on the framework. Some of them are known as what's called dynamic purchasing systems, which are effectively open frameworks, which means that you can be added to them at any point in time. So a simple example is the North of England CPC run a estates dynamic procurement service. So if you were someone who could offer estates services, then you can access that framework. It's the same with the Spark DPS framework from Crown Commercial Services. Others are what's known as closed frameworks, so are effectively anything from sort of 2 to 4 years in length. And if you're not on it, you're not on it until they reopen that framework. So again, it does depend on the type of framework. The new law keeps most of that, doesn't really change anything in terms of the new Procurement Act. So yes, depending on the market, it can be a case of waiting it out. That's when, fundamentally, when we would look at a sort of collaboration or a lead specific procurement anyway. So if we know there is a supplier or suppliers who can offer a solution that isn't available on the framework, then we would obviously clearly identify whether we believe that's the right thing to do then to procure something ourselves. How do we push to get to see what other frameworks may exist that we could get people on, or we just so unfortunately there's nothing we can do on this particular way. The hardest one is actually the medtech ones through NHS supply chain, because they are generally closed frameworks at this moment in time, and normally last sort of 2 to 4 years, and then normally at the 4-year end, just because of the complexity of doing those on a national basis. So whereas lots of the others are easier to do. Are there any tenders for orthopaedic products? If so, where do we find them, or is it mainly local procurement contracts through NHSC to be discussed with trusts? Not 100% sure. We procure orthopaedics generally through NHS supply chain currently. It would depend on, are you offering something completely different in that marketplace? But they tend to be done through NHS supply chain, and historically, for the past at least 6 years, we've done those as collaborative arrangements where we can with others across West Yorkshire. It's not to say we will always do that, but those would be the areas that we're looking to do. Next one we've already answered. Do I have any thoughts on the refined performance metrics framework? Not really. I think with lots of these things, let's just wait and see. Don't know a huge amount about it, if I'm honest, but sorry, I've got a huge amount to say on that one. And do I have any suggestions on how to overcome skepticism about manufacturer-produced evidence? It's always difficult. So, as I've mentioned, I've been offered thousands of products and services, and suppliers will make all sorts of claims about those. So I think the more evidence that you can have that is not that is not a single source is definitely helpful. So if you're introducing a new medical technology that you say is going to stop surgical site infections, you just won't have any. And where's your evidence base for that? If your evidence base is we've done 3 operations in 1 hospital, that's not going to carry as much weight as we've done this over sort of 10,000 episodes across 50 institutions across the world. So I think it can create skepticism because it's that what is it, what's the evidence you're suggesting and where is it coming from? If you start to unpick that, does it stack up? Can you find it? Can we get access to it? We are all naturally, we are all wary of agreeing to do something, as I say, particularly around if that's going to directly affect patient care, then we want to make sure that we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's on something like that. So how do we overcome it? I think it's having as broad an evidence base as you're able to provide, and is that backed up by independent sort of analysis and work. That can be costly, and I fully appreciate if you're a very small organisation, you may not have funding to do that. But that almost comes back to where we can help support. How do we give you access to clinicians or opportunities to say we can help take some of that legwork off organisations? So I think that's where it's critical to have conversations with sort of the innovation teams and things like that, because they can certainly unlock how we do that. There is a little bit of, comes back to, there are thousands of experts in the NHS and they'll all have their own opinions. So regardless of what evidence base you've got, some of this does become subjective. And, with the best will in the world, it's difficult to do that. I was once talking to a sort of colorectal consultant who shall remain nameless, but said, I'm very superstitious. If I use something on Friday and it worked, why would I want to change that on Monday morning? Because would you want to be the person who suddenly has a new thing put in you that I don't know exactly how to use? And he's like, yeah, I do get that. And a lot of it's superstition, for those of you who do sport or do anything regularly where you think, I put my left shoe on this morning and I had a real good day at work, I'm going to put my left shoe on every morning the same way. There's no real evidence on that, is there? But that's how people feel. And we do have to accept, you are trying to engage with human beings first. With all of our foibles and weirdness that comes up. We try and combat that, but it is a reality of where we are. So I think that was it in terms of the Q&A. So just let me go back to the questions.
Okay, just ask one more.
Yep.
You mentioned before about Jim Mackey is pushing central or ICB-led procurement.
Mhm.
What do you think the main driver for that is? I think I probably know what it is, but just confirm to us what you think the main driver for that is. How much pressure are you seeing personally and within the trust here, and where do you perceive the first ports of call for those larger scale system-wide procurements to happen?
Yeah. So in terms of I think Jim's coming from 2 places, and I think the NHS centrally still has this mythical, why aren't we doing things at scale more and we'll save loads of money, and there's billions of pounds if we just all bought the same thing together. They don't actually understand the reality of the world we live in, and we keep trying to, part of my job is to combat that nationally. So I think that's always going to be a thing, and economies of scale and, spending the NHS pound at its best level of something that we will continue to sort of come up against, because that is generally a centralist view versus a local sort of view, and that happens in other sectors. It's not just unique to the NHS. I think the other thing from Jim's area is this is also about the people and resources. If you look at what's happening, particularly at NHS England and how it's going to be integrated now, it's not absorbed, it's integrated into Department of Health and Social Care. and effectively there are, potentially up to 50% of the people are going to be out of a job. There is some of that now being pushed onto, so this is about people and process within trusts. Is it right that you should have in West Yorkshire 11 procurement teams doing 11 procurements for the same thing? The whole answer is it's not how we should be doing things, is it? So a lot of my current time is focused on that aspect of it rather than necessarily are we buying the right stuff at a collaborative level. I think where are we going to see the weight of collaboration in the short term on sort of areas is the areas we already do a fair bit of collaboration on. So that will particularly be in the clinical space. More frequently, I think it will be moving into IT because systems and as systems and processes align, so as corporate functions look at, is this the best way to do things? You'll then start to naturally say, well, why do we have 6 systems doing the same thing? So I think that will follow on from there. And yeah, I think, we all, within West Yorkshire, we're pretty well advanced. We're not the best, but we are pretty well advanced in terms of some of the areas where we've collaborated for effectively 8 years now, particularly across the acutes, but also now including sort of community and mental health organisations. So I think that will continue. So it'll be clinical first, followed by probably IT in the States. Not sure which order, probably dependent on what we're doing. In terms of significant procurements that we've got coming up, decontamination services, linen and laundry, and tax risk solutions are probably 3 of the biggest areas over the next 2 years we'll be collaborating on. But others won't be far behind this electronic prescribing, this sort of electronic patient records from an IT perspective. Who knows what's going to happen with sort of building the Leeds Way future and how that maybe links into wider hospitals future network. And then I think it will be, if procurement are going on the journey of almost what's the right size of procurement and how do we deliver services on a wider footprint, behind us will be other corporate services. So I think that will naturally change how they look at doing things as well. But that's not a year or two out. I'd say that's more sort of 4 or 5 years hence. So yeah. When is the 10-year plan due? I think it's due out next month. Don't hold me to that because it's not. I'm not signing it off. That's with the Secretary of State, but I believe it's due imminently. So, but like everything to do with Department of Health and NHS England, they'll probably say something like the summer, and summer don't end until like middle of September when you look at it accurately. So we shall see. But my understanding is it has been drafted and is now doing the rounds around, the great and the good of the world, seeing what that's going to look like. And I think innovators, sustainability is certainly important. However, there has been a consideration on this. Has there been a consideration on this expectation with respect to impact on suppliers? That's how suppliers are feasibly able to provide this at a sensible cost and still do their day job without increasing the cost of the NHS. Yes, I mean it's a difficult one to manage, and it's something we're always conscious of. As I say, I recently did a procurement that was just for £25,000 worth of support that we needed around an issue that we had, and I'd still put in that there was a social value criteria that we expected you to do. But the answer to that is proportionate to the amount of money that I'm spending. I'm not expecting someone to say, right, I'm going to go into, I'm going to recruit 16 people from Leeds and I'm going to, spend £500,000 on sort of some big project in Leeds, because I was expecting you to spend 25 grand in total. What they actually came up with is said, we'll offer to do a piece of pro bono work with your charity for a day where we'll provide them this advice. Great. Can't ask for more than that. You've thought about it. It was local. It benefited the people of Leeds. So those are the types of things. So I think we need to try. You need to try and be proportionate. And this is where it's back to, for us in Leeds. We will signpost you to our Leeds Hospital charity, and they will be able to offer solutions. But try and think about it around what is that local context that you can deliver, and that doesn't actually necessarily mean that you have to spend a load of money to deliver it. Some of that might be around. You already do things now. Some of you might already give to charity. Prime example at the minute is the Rob Burrow MND Centre in Leeds. So, great thing for us to be supporting, but others, organisations have got involved in that and offered to donate things, time, money. Some people have run the marathon recently, or the half marathon. So it's things like that as well. Is how you're contributing sort of more generically. This doesn't have to be a case of I'm going to invest a huge amount of money into something. Some of it might be resource and time, but that's sometimes easier to give for organisations. But yeah, it needs to be proportional. If you don't feel it is, then those are the ones that you need to query. It's hard. What we're trying to do is build up almost some good examples of things that people can consider when they do things and produce those. But it's still a bit difficult at the minute because you could be spending, 30 million quid on an IT system or as I say, 25 grand on a piece of consultancy support. So finding the right balance is difficult. But just try and think along those lines. What can I do that's proportionally relevant to what I'm being asked to bid against? And I think that was it. So I'm not sure. There's anything.
That's amazing. Any more questions from our audience here in
Go on, there was-
well, can
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Well, I don't even know the answer, but just a little information on that. I mean, for stuff for medical stuff already published on the pipeline, the website. I mean, is that well, just like those things gonna go for the supply chain? I mean, like for probably innovative medical equipment on the pipeline, is they already being selected by the procurement team and already have a champion there, or
No, I mean, so not always. It's hard because sometimes we can't publish a pipeline that says what innovation we don't know we're going to undertake in the next 18 months. We'd only publish that if there's something we're aware of now that we want to re-procure. That's not to say we can't accept innovation within that re-procurement. But I think if we're talking about a new entrant or a new piece of technology or something that we're not doing at the minute, it's unlikely we'll have a pipeline notice that says we're going to be spending this type of money in the next sort of 12 to 18 months. However, there are innovation clauses, particularly when it comes to medical devices and medical equipment. There are innovation clauses within the existing frameworks that NHS supply chain use that we would access. So whilst we might be saying, right, we're going to re-procure cardiology next year, so there might be a notice that says Leeds are going to spend 10 million quid on cardiology in 18 months. Within that, there may well be products and services that you could deliver potentially in an innovative way that we would be looking to introduce at that point. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg. You've got to look at that and think, well, this is something I might be doing in that space. That means they might want to include that in their re-procurement. But if it's truly something new, it's unlikely what we've got in our pipeline is going to be relevant stage. So,
okay, thank you.
and this is where it's back to speak to us as procurement people. We can help and try and advise and say that's what we mean by what we're re-procuring is what we've always procured in the past, and either we just want more of the same or no, actually, if you've got a solution, we will look at that. But yeah, it's going to be 18 months from now, but before we're in a position where we're going to really want to buy it. So yeah, I think it's just speak to us.
When you've got technologies that are still in development, at what point would you expect those probably still small companies to engage with like frameworks and things like that? Would you expect it to be kind of post-clinical trial where you've got evidence that you can then use within your applications?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to answer because sometimes it can take an awful long time to get on the framework. So the earlier you start, the better. But I think the reality is it's a lot of work to get on the framework. So how much energy and effort do you want to expend getting yourself on a framework for something that you can't actually sell even if you was available on there? So I think it's got to be when you've got a solution that you think is ready for more widely distributable sort of sale. That's not to say there are occasions when getting on a framework would help you, and it might be that it's specific. But I would expect that at that stage you've worked with the likes of us or the innovation team and sort of understood, well, we're getting you on this framework for this particular reason. Here's why. But yeah, I think it's going to be after clinical trials. It's going to be after you've ironed out the initial sort of requirements.
Well, I guess you could do the first bit. I guess could you do the hypothetical situation of we've got this idea, it's going to do trials in 2027, assuming it's successful and liked. How would it purchase? And you could say in that case, it would be on this framework. And
here's when these frameworks renew, or here's how I access them now, or roughly what they're looking at. So yeah, I don't think there's any harm in thinking about the long term, which is why I tried to say these are the ones we use. So yes, I fully appreciate not everything is going to be ready today, but yeah, it's about trying to think of those steps into the future and what am I going to need. And otherwise you almost hit the, well, I've done it in Leeds now, but everyone's going to ask me for the same thing, and everyone's going to say the same, well, I can spend up to 100 grand with you, and then I've got to go out to tender, or it'd be less than that in some organisations. So you end up hitting the same barriers fairly quickly, multiple times. So yeah, having thought of that, and to be fair, we do this, some services we sell as leads, and we've done the same. We've got ourselves on the SPAC DPS framework. I'm not sure we've done any business on it yet, but we know that trusts are asking us, and their questions are, well, how do we buy this from you? Just because you're leads don't mean you're exempt. So yeah.
Can I ask one last question?
Yeah.
Of course you can.
So when you're kind of that early stage, let's say you've built some clinical evidence with support of the hospital, you look at that initial procurement, probably at quite a small scale. Is that something, like, do the clinicians have a big influence at that point as to whether they want to adopt technologies that might affect how their patients navigate the pathway?
Yeah, ultimately they are the main decision maker. So I can sit here and tell them what a good commercial opportunity looks like and what good procurement looks like. I'm not a clinician. I've not spent the past 30 years as a neurosurgeon and know that that's the right thing to do for that Parkinson's patient. So yes, they are. Yeah, and this is where it's back to, who are those stakeholders? Who are those key decision makers? They're generally going to be at a local level. They are not people sat in the centre. You may have seen things like the GAFT programme, and there's very good people in there, Professor Tim Briggs and all sorts of people, but still the people on the ground are going to make those decisions. So yes, and it would be, if this was a HR issue, it'd probably be the lead HR person, or the lead nurse, or the lead estates individual, or the lead IT person. So yeah, there's always going to be those key decision makers. But yeah, we'll never. I'll challenge clinicians and say, "Are you absolutely sure?" That's my job. So, but ultimately, I can't say that's a better hit than that one. So yeah, you should use that. So, yeah.
There was one more comment or question around any particular success stories of working with innovators all the way through to procurement.
So I'll give you an example of something that we did that ticks a number of the things that I've come across. So we buy minimal invasive surgery products. So these are keyhole surgery. So there are things that we buy that effectively you stick a hole in someone with a bit of a plastic thing, and then you prod something into it. So you can tell I'm not a clinician now. So I hope there's no clinicians on there, because they'll be crying and saying, "What's this idiot doing?" And those things are generally single-use devices, can be very expensive, and you throw them away straight afterwards. So we worked with an organisation who could, once that device had been used, so effectively it was think of it as a scalpel. It's not quite that, but that's what it was. So that device was used for a procedure for 20 minutes, and then it's basically a battery-powered handpiece with a long sort of probe on the end, and then a sort of bit on the end which was sort of electrically charged and sealed vessels. And we bought one of those, and they're about 300 quid each, and then we chucked them in the bin. So that's a lot of waste, and it was in clinical waste bin, so it was all incinerated. So what we decided, that there was an organisation who could take that item, take it away, repurpose all of the bits of it, so effectively refurbish it, like if you go to an Apple store and get a refurbed iPhone, and then give it back to us, and charged us 150 quid for that. So it's half the price. It was a sustainable item. Every bit of it was reused. None of it was thrown away. It was re-sterilised, and it was CE marked back. So that's probably a good, and that took about 2 years, because not only did we have to get, well, how are you actually going to do all of this? We then had to get through things like infection prevention control. So how is it safe that you can take a product which technically may have human waste on it, as in, there are bits of blood or bits of a body stuck to it. How do you take that? How do you make sure it's safe in the fact it's transited to wherever it's going to, and then it's remanufactured to such a standard we're happy to use it again, and then it comes back to us in a way that works for us. So, but we worked with everybody to get that through, and 50% of those, we still have to buy some new ones because otherwise we're going to replace them. They don't last forever. But that was an example of something that we've done like that. So, yeah, it's a bit, it's not a one-man band. That was a big project, but it's the type of thing we can do. There's something else in neurosurgery where there was an organisation that had a very new product in the marketplace. It was used in Australia and I think somewhere in Canada or America somewhere. Didn't have any CE marks, didn't have authorisation here. But again, we worked with that organisation because it offered a benefit to the patients and their quality of life was massively improved. So again, we worked for a number of months. We got derogations around. It didn't have certain legal compliances, but we got derogations to use it. Very active clinical engagement. They could see the benefit in doing this and were prepared to manage the risk around that. So yes, those are opportunities that we can do. And that was quite a small organisation who, is now sort of building up globally effectively. So I think there are a couple of examples I would point to.
So if there's no more questions, Paul, thank you so much for an engaging and really informative session. That's really appreciated on our part. Perhaps we could just show our appreciation. Happy to share your slides.
Yeah, happy to share the slides. We'll pick through the questions.